Here is the US English translation, keeping the meaning and length as close as possible to the original. Imagine a country with the largest oil reserves in the world. Those people were once richer than many European nations. Wo's capital was once called the Paris of South America, but in just about 10 years the economy of that country lost more than 80% of its value. Its currency became worthless to the point that people used it to start fires. More than 7 million people had to flee the country, and that is the story of Venezuela, one of the largest economic collapses in modern history. So, what exactly happened to this country? And today, we'll tell you about the collapse of Venezuela, a nation that was once very rich. Venezuela is located in South America. It has something many countries dream of, which is oil. In fact, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, even more than Saudi Arabia, since the 1920s, when oil was extracted on a large public scale. Money began to flow into the country. For most of the 20th century, Venezuela was one of the richest economies in Latin America, with high-income enveloped cities. People lived quite comfortably. Everything seemed to be going in the right direction, but there was a major problem. That was the economy of Venezuela depended almost entirely on oil. At one point, 90 to 98% of the country's exports were oil, and this created an economic phenomenon called Dutch deceit. Happens when one resource sector grows too strong and kills off other sectors, and as a result, Venezuela did not produce enough food. They had to import most goods. If oil prices went up, then everything was fine, but if oil prices had problems, the entire economy would collapse. In 1998, a man named Hugo Chavez became president. At that time, oil prices were rising sharply. Money from oil flowed into the budget, hundreds of billions of dollars. Chavez used that money to fund social programs, subsidized food-free, healthcare-free education, infrastructure development, and in the short term this improved people's lives significantly, and many believed this was the future of Venezuela. But there was a problem: the government did not invest in diversifying the economy. Everything still depended on oil, and a major mistake began that while Chavez's government started nationalizing many private business, meaning they took assets into state control, but this caused business to leave Venezuela. Foreign investors began to withdraw. Meanwhile, corruption at home began to spread. Billions of dollars from oil disappeared from the budget. For example, a state oil company called Petróleo de Venezuela. Many officials were accused of embezzling money from oil contracts, and by 2014, after Chavez passed away, his successor named Nicolas Maduro in 2014, global oil prices began to collapse sharply for Venezuela. This was a disaster because oil was the main source of revenue, and the country's income dropped suddenly. Old policies remained with high spending, massive subsidy, strict currency controls, leading to skyrocketing inflation, shortages, dose scarcity. GDP dropped sharply. A deep economic crisis began. Maduro continued the old policies, did not cut spending, instead printed money, massive lion. The bolivar began to lose value. Hyperinflation started in late 2016, around 4,000% in 2017, millions of percent in 2018 and 2019. Money became worthless. People burned money for warmth. Prices changed daily. Stores did not list price as minimum wage was only a few dollars per month, and when the economy collapsed, people's lives became extremely difficult. Many places faced food shortage, lack of medicine, power outages, hospitals lacked equipment, and the result was a massive wave of migration. More than 7 million Venezuelans left the country. This is one of the largest migrations in modern history, and the situation became worse when Venezuela was internationally isolated. Countries such as the United States imposed economic sanctions. These sanctions limited Venezuela from selling oil, prevented access to international financial markets, and foreign banks and companies withdrew, and the already weak economy collapsed further. On January 3, 2026, U.S. Special Forces raided Caracas. Arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife were taken to the United States to face serious charges as conspiracy to traffic drugs to fund terrorist conspiracy to import cocaine into the U.S. and possession of machine guns and destructive devices. President Trump declared the U.S. would temporarily control Venezuela's oil sector so oil barrel sees about 30 to 50 million barrels partially ease sanctions, and the vice president would serve as interim president. At that time oil production increased slightly. Sports reached about 800,000 1 million barrels per day. Oil sector reforms removed laws from Chavez's era. Richest state shrank began attracting foreign investors. The economy grew with double-digit forecasts in 2026 thanks to oil sales, but still very fragile. Inflation at the start of the year in just 2 months was about 52%. Public debt remained high. Infrastructure heavily damaged. Politics unstable. No clear democratic elections. Venezuela still has a huge advantage. Largest oil reserves in the world. Minerals. Vast agricultural land, but recovery requires deep political reforms. Anti-corruption diversification of the economy. During international trust, the road is still very long from an oil paradise to a global warning lesson that resources do not guarantee wealth if poorly managed and blindly depended on. This may not have been a random move by the United States. Trump made an extremely strategic move by securing Venezuela's oil supply, removing Maduro firsthand, preparing for larger military action, specifically targeting Iran, because you would not attack a major oil power like Iran until you have a backup supply ready. Do you think this move by Trump was pre-calculated by